Welcome to Your Awakening, a collection of life stories told by heart-centered, passionate women on a mission to live our truth. We hope you gain peace and strength through each conversation, as together we will raise the vibration of the world, one journey at a time. Hello. So welcome back. Another series of Your Awakening. And I'm really excited today because we're going to switch roles. You might have seen my dear sister, Jennie Willoughby, on a previous series. Hey, Jennie.
Hello.
And today she is going to be interviewing me. So I am going to share with you all my story, my journey to awakening, and has led me to the here and now. So I will let Jennie take it over from here, and here we go.
All right. So as Jill mentioned, I am Jennie Willoughby. I am a writer and speaker on the topic of resilience, healing through trauma and abuse. I am sitting down today with the lovely Jill Heiman of Awake Journey. She is a speaker, a coach, a visionary. She specializes in the topic of reclaiming your identity after misplacing it, putting it in external sources outside yourself and coming home to yourself. I am so honored and humbled to be able to have this conversation with you today, Jill. So my first question for you is, what would you say was the jumping off point for your awakening on your journey?
Jumping off point, I think it was when I came out of the womb, right? Like I am just,
say that.
I have been on this roller coaster that is life, and there are so many aspects to my life, and there's high points, and then there's the really low emotional trauma down points. And without either of those, without the wave of life, I don't think that I would be right here right now having this conversation with you.
Yeah. It's definitely our trials and our adversities that give us the strength and desire to serve others. With that in mind, I know that one of the primary platforms that you seek as an audience is youth, particularly college-age youth. And so I'm wondering what that says to you, what that speaks to you.
Yeah, one of my, so to speak back to that, one of my really main points was I was 19. I was 19 and I was a sophomore in college, and I just was in such a depressed place, but I didn't have a word for it. Like, I didn't know that it was even depression. I just didn't feel right. And it just calls to me now so greatly because I see the world that we're in. I see the mass loads of social media. I see the pressure that is being put on, this generation that is going through school, going through college right now. And I just can't imagine being in that space now, but I'm here to offer my light and like my stories to help them through depression, through sexual trauma, to really get clear on who they are as a person. Like, what is their values? What are their superpowers? And when that's in alignment, then you can step really powerfully forward through your career, like after graduation, because you're true, like you know who you are, and you don't have to rely on an external label or anything that can be taken away from you like that.
Tell me more about 19-year-old Jill and the struggle that she was having with that external identification.
So I was an athlete. I had a scholarship, and from a very young age, I've played all sorts of sports. You name it, and I've probably played it. And I mean, my entire youth up to college through high school was filled with sports. And I mean, I remember my summers, like, it's crazy, right, to think back, but my Mondays were, I think it was like my Mondays and my Wednesdays were for volleyball. My Tuesday and Thursdays were for like softball. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I was traveling on a travel AAU basketball team, traveling, staying in hotels. That was basketball. And it's really funny because like what your brain has to do to just switch to play all these sports. I remember one time I was out on the softball field and I was a shortstop and I went to ground a ball and I literally come up, and you should fire the ball to first, right? Like you want to get the runner out. And I come up and I shoot it. Like I shoot the softball like a basketball because my brain is like, where are you? What sport? What are you playing right now? But like I share this because that's what I knew. And I loved my teams but I didn't know anything different. And so I knew I would go to college to play basketball. And, you know, looking back, I wish that I would have had a voice or someone to ask me, hey, Jill, like, what would you love to do after basketball? And that was never asked. And I mean, you think of it like I would go to college to play a sport.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little backwards. So, you know, I found myself freshman year, got through my first year. Freshman year brought along, you know, its own, you're a freshman and you feel like you have so much to prove. And, you know, I didn't drink a lot in high school. And I just remember specific times where it was like, I didn't have anyone to take my hand, and like, you just had to figure all of this out on your own. And we had one of the first college parties, and it was, I was a freshman, and we were basically told, the seniors came in and they were like, hey, what do you guys want to drink? And I don't drink. So I just said a beer. I will take one beer. And they came back with like 40s. And if you remember the old game, like you would put 2 40s in your hand, duct tape, like, and you have to finish it before you could leave. And I didn't drink in high school. So clearly left very intoxicated, make it to this party. All I remember is I fall off the front porch and like face plant, like I'm in the grass, and I look up and there's one of my teammates and I am just bawling. And I'm like, I'm not going to make times when we do sprints. Like, how am I ever, like, all of this fear, it was fear. And like the not enoughness and all of this pressure of like, okay, I made it here. I have the scholarship, you know, and I don't know, I guess, there's so much more to athlete, and that's just a small portion. Like my freshman year gets me then to sophomore year. And sophomore year was a challenge. Sophomore year is a very critical point in my life where my life took a really different turn. And it was quite clear that I listened to my intuition. And despite all of the pressure, knowing who I was and having this label on athlete, I did listen to my inner knowing that this team that I was on, like, was not for me. It was not where I should be at that point in time in my life. And I listened and I quit. I quit that team. I had to call a lot of people to make sure that it was okay that I quit. I remember I called my high school coach. Mm-hmm. I called my uncle. Like I had multiple meetings with my family, because it's like I had to make sure that the exterior outside of me was okay if I would quit this thing that is the only thing that I knew.
Will you still love me? Will you still see me if I'm not in this anymore?
So much of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people can relate to that fear.
Yeah. So I did it and I quit. And, you know, in quitting the team ensued a really, really dark depression, really low. And I didn't have my teammates. I didn't have friends because all of the athletes were my friends. And, you know, in college, like you go to athlete parties.
Yeah.
So I had no one, and then I didn't have the routine. You know, when you're an athlete, you're set up pretty great for a routine. Like you go to your class, you have practice at this time. If you have away games, food is prepared for you. I mean, it's a pretty set up, awesome situation, but I didn't have any of that now. And so initially I turned to binge eating. And I remember I would just eat I thought I was eating good, but it would be like a whole jar of peanut butter. I would buy like a whole bag of cherries. I would eat all of it at one time. So it was just like binge eating. And then I would go to the gym. I had to join a city gym because I wasn't an athlete. I couldn't get into the regular gyms on campus. And then I would go work out. Like I would push myself. I remember I ate a whole jar of peanut butter one time and then went and tried to sprint miles on the treadmill. And like just trying to fit myself in somewhere because, you know, I didn't know who I was.
Can I ask you a little bit more about how you experienced depression? I know obviously binge eating and then self-punishing by exercise and trying to create that routine was clearly part of it for you. But I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about what depression looked like and felt like for you in that time.
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked that because I've had 3 different spouts in my 20s of specific depression, and they were not similar. So that's such a great question because depression doesn't have a shape on it. There's not a size, there's not a fit all. And this experience for me would be, I would call this my masked depression. There is not one person that knew that I was going through this. I would wait. I would put on such a show when I would have to step out on campus and be in classes, such a show. And then as soon as I got home, it's like, oh my gosh, just get me home into my apartment so I can close the door. Because it was just so dark. There was no light.
The show was being positive, being energetic, being okay.
This.
Yeah. And what you really wanted to be was not okay. That's how you were really feeling.
Not okay. When people ask, how are you doing? I'm great. No.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. It was really dark and it was very lonely. One of the loneliest times that I have ever experienced. I didn't have anyone, you know? And I'm living in an apartment by myself. Like I'm 19, you're really trying to like find your way.
And the reason you went to college was to play basketball. Now you're questioning your future and the decisions why am I in college? Who am I if I'm not this? And the feelings of depression, just chemically in terms of how they bathe your brain and distort your decision-making process is making it all that much more harder to really hone in on what your next steps should be.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know in these deepest, darkest moments in your depression, what was the light? What was the hope? What was the turning point? Because I know, having known your story, that there was a turning point. Can you talk to us about that?
So I didn't see light for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I had suicidal thoughts. I was screaming for help. I at one point said, like, I need help, you know, and it's the societal standards, unfortunately, that I didn't get that help, you know, and what would people think? I'm going to a therapist.
That's how you felt, or that's how people responded to you?
I think that's, you know, that was a family reaction of just it's a scared space to be in, you know. And I think when people are dealing with depression, that's typical. Like they just don't know how to respond, especially if they've never experienced it. And in this darkness, I turned to sex, and definitely not light. I turned to sex as power. I was so lost that, yeah, I was so lost that I found that, okay, well, this is another external thing unconsciously that I then turned to, but that somehow I had control over that. Like somehow I had control over that situation of like having sex with another person. And the reality is, all I wanted, like, I just wanted validation, well done, Jill. Like, you're doing such a good job. You're being all that you can be. Or what would you love to do with your life? Like support and love,
right.
guidance.
And I don't think it's uncommon for women, for young girls to seek an identity and a power and a control in sex. And then we have this duality in society that says, well, the vision that we're supposed to be is sexy and attractive and beautiful, but how we're actually supposed to behave is very demure and meek and mild. And that duality creates issues and problems in and of itself, because here we are, young women, trying to understand our sexuality. It can be weaponized very easily, and misunderstood very easily, I think, particularly for young women of high school and college age who are really trying to understand what their sexuality means. I know that in your story, you've talked about how being curious and using that sexual expression was something that really propelled you forward. And I'm going to prepare you now because I'm going to ask you some hard questions. And I want you to feel comfortable answering them, because there's no right or wrong way to do this. I will ask you to clarify or give me more details if there's something that I think is unclear, that I don't understand. And again, I want to emphasize that if I'm asking questions or asking for follow-up, it's not a pushback or a judgment on anything that you're saying. I simply want to give you the opportunity to express yourself as clearly as possible. Okay?
Thank you. Yeah.
So, you have talked about how one of the topics you talk about is sexual trauma. You've now guided us on your journey in college to your sophomore year, when you have now started to embrace sex as a new identity and a new form of control for you. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how that misunderstanding of sex as control put you into a difficult situation.
Yeah. So I do want to touch on, and the curious part of it, because that is just an innate gift that we all have when we come into this world. And as I have stepped more and more into my divine feminine, into who I am, it is quite clear that that is such a power. Like our sexual way and our sexual being is such a power for creativity. It just gets locked up and shut away. And this happened for me at 19. And, I was curious, and I was also lost, and I decided to go to a party at a nearby school, and it was an athlete party, and I went by myself. And in that moment, I did feel like if I go to this party where there are these athletes, I'm going to feel at home, because I was so lost. I had no, yeah. Let me get that label back for just one night. So I go to the party, and I had known, like I knew a couple of the guys there. I knew them very well. And I was sparked with sex and the curiosity of what would a threesome be like. And so I said yes to those two guys. I said yes to that spark of curiosity. And, I'll also add that at this party, I think it was like 2 drinks. So this decision was very intentional that I had made.
Was it
And
made
drinks.
in the moment, or was it something that you and these friends had discussed before?
It was in the moment. So I said yes, and we went downstairs to the basement in this house, and we went to this room, we went to this bedroom, and continued to get curious. And they put their clothes back on, and as we finished, and they left the room before me, and I was finishing getting dressed, and they had left the room, and I go to leave out the door, and it was locked. The door was locked from the outside. And, at first you're in this situation, and I thought, like, maybe this is a joke, like, this isn't really happening. I'm like, okay, am I really locked in this room? And I start banging on the door, and, it's a party going on upstairs. No one can hear me. I'm like screaming their names. And then what seemed like a handful of men enter the room, and the door closes again. And I say men because, they were very large football players. They were athletes, and they were tall, and they were strong. And to me, in that moment at 19, they looked like men. I mean, I'm now aware they were boys. And, they pulled down their pants and they put condoms on. And I can tell you that I have never in my life felt like I was in a box without a door. And that was the most loss of power that I have literally ever experienced in my life. And I thought that I could control sex. Here I was thinking I had some sort of power in sex, that I could control the situation. And I wound up in an absolutely out of control situation. And in that moment of, like, this is happening, okay, I think, like, my brain goes into like a fight or flight response, and I clearly could not fight clearly was not going to be able to fight my way out of this. So I couldn't run. I was locked in the room. I turned to, like, the smallest amount of power that any woman that has ever experienced this type of situation. And for me, that power was sex. And the only way that I knew I could get out of this would be to have sex. And, I didn't say yes to this situation. I said yes to the 2 guys that I knew. And so I eked up the smallest sliver of power, and I approached the guy in the middle. And I don't give him the power to look me in my eyes. So I approach him and I turn around, and I allow him to enter me. And that's how I got out of the situation. I walked out of the house, got out of the room, walked up the stairs, walked out of the house. And when I walked down that front porch, and I'm standing on this yard, I specifically remember, like, it was a very quick, another decision that I would shove this down. I would literally just so deep in the darkest crevices of my body and my being, so it would not ever have to come out again. And darkness seeks light. I held on to this story for 16 years, and I have been actively working the last 4 years with therapists and healers and teachers to safely guide me to the healing, to the peeling back, to the forgiveness, to the utmost self-compassion for myself. Yeah. And for the boys. And for the boys.
I want to go back to what you said about being in fight or flight and not having any memories, and just touch on that for a second, because certainly in sexual trauma and physical trauma, but in a lot of trauma situations, what our brain does is it sends us a rush of adrenaline and cortisol, which are stress hormones, which stimulate the prefrontal cortex of our brain to fight or flight. It limits our decision-making capabilities. It limits fact storing, because in a fight or flight situation, you don't use the prefrontal cortex. You don't make decisions. You fight or you flee. And it also releases what are natural forms of opioids and oxytocin, which are meant to calm any traumatic feelings. So you're numbed, actually physically numbed as well. And as a result of that, oftentimes people who have been the victim of any type of trauma or sexual assault don't have clear memories of what happened to them. The memories that they have are sensory in their body. They can remember what it felt like, or they can remember emotions. And so I want to ask you, if it's okay, to go a little bit more into what it was like when these, you're calling them boys, but I'm gonna correct you and say these are men. These are men clearly aware of their decisions. And I want to know if you can tell me more about when they came into the room, any words that were said to indicate to them that you were afraid, or that this is not what you wanted, or anything that they communicated to you.
Yeah. My soul left my body in this moment. And so it was such a silence of like, this is what's happening. You can see it in front of you, but then it's like, literally, it's like this, frozen.
Yeah.
I know that I was internally like, no, right? Like, no, whether or not that was voiced, like, I don't know that I was even in a space to be able to eke it out, because it's literally was like there's no words for that, really. It just like complete close off, shut down, like.
Which is another trauma. I mean, that's a very common trauma response. Freeze for survival.
Yeah.
I'd also like to go back to when you said you, I want to use your words, you eked out the only way of control and power that you had, which was sex. And so you made a decision that for your very survival, the only thing that you could do was to have sex to get out of this room. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because I now have come in contact with different women just as I'm out sharing my story. And it's a quite common thing of, okay, and we rationalize it. I rationalized it as, well, this is just sex, because I had been rationalizing it and placing sex as like not the true sacred union act that it is, and not in the manner in which I hold it today. And so it was just an act, you know, it was just two people doing this thing. And So I somehow rationalized it. Okay, if I just do this, but even furthermore, this is how I can get out of this. Furthermore, I have no control over this situation. Okay, so what is something that I could control? Okay, well, then it all goes back to this act that is sex, which is where my power was, because I was just lost. I didn't know who I was.
In this situation, you weren't given that autonomy. You weren't given the autonomy to be able to speak up and voice what you truly wanted. And I think, like I said, it's common to acquiesce for survival. I want to thank you for being able to sit with me as I'm asking those questions, because I know it's not easy, and I'm really proud of you for being able to share what you have. As we go out of the room, out of the basement, out of the house, I want to go back to the self-preservation moment. I could almost see it in your posture where you went, this thing that just happened, it's not there. It's not a part of me. But then you said something really poetic, which was, it seeks light. This darkness, this dark thing that happened to you seeks light. And I think that, to me, in knowing you and in knowing your work, is truly what your gift is, which is to be able to shine light into the darkness for people. And so now that we're where we are, years later, healing and forgiveness later, talk to me about that journey into the light.
Yes. Many years. And it showed up in my womb space. Like, that's where my intestines, my digestive, I had issues, and it really came forth the last, I don't know, probably 10 years. I just didn't know what it was. Well, it's repressed trauma, and there are so many things that I think when anyone that has experienced any type of trauma, emotional, sexual, when you repress it, it's internalized, has to come out. Like, it will show up in your body in some shape or form. And I have come to this space of really honing in, really listening to my body, like through, various meditation, embodiment work. You and I met in a really powerful course with our teacher, Anahita June, and the wakening up of stagnant energy that I had been holding on to for so long was a process. But to even get to this space, there's so much more. And, we can have a follow-up call, because I had another depression bout at 25. I had another clear depression bout at 28. And it took me many years of all of these things to then stack up so I could fully feel like the cost. And this isn't how I'm going to live my life anymore, in the spiral, the constant.
Thank you for sharing those as well. And I don't know, unless there's something that you want to share, I don't know that we need to go into the specifics of the other rounds of depression, but I'm so grateful that you brought that up, because another very commonality between victims of trauma, particularly sexual trauma, is chronic depression, and bouts of depression and bouts of suicidal ideation. As a result of, as you described, that repressed trauma. It's appearing physiologically in your body. And the depression is one way that our body has, one thermometer that our body has for allowing us to know that there's something that we need to address. So thank you for mentioning that. It wasn't a one-time situation and then it reappeared 15 years later. It was you internally, emotionally, and spiritually fighting to get that memory out so that you'd be able to heal it and transmute it into something powerful, which is, I know that's what you're doing with it now. You've transmuted it into something very, very powerful. Being able to share your story of being lost after having the title of athlete taken away from you, and that search for identity. So tell me more about your mission, your cause around that.
Hmm. You've known me now for as long as we've known it. It feels like 10 years, probably past lifetime, but I show up in a space with every decision that I make from such an intentional place. And so with this intention, it is quite clear and in quite alignment of me speaking and working one-on-one with my clients that when we misplace our identity in anything that is external, it could be a label, a job, a relationship that can be taken away from us. That's when trouble can stir up. That's when internal turmoil, because then we find ourselves in a lost space, imbalance. Exactly. So it's really honing in on, like, who are you? Take all of this away. Who is your soul? Like, what are you placed on this earth to do? To be. I don't use the word do very often, to be. And from there, then it's confused power. Because when we are mislabeling ourselves, we then wrap power in things that we have no power over, trying to hold so tightly this control strength. Like, we really have control over these things. We don't. So it's really leaning in, trusting, surrendering, being clear with who you are and allowing that, like my audiences and through my workshops, of now you can step really confidently into this next chapter of your life.
Yeah, really knowing yourself, independent of all the identities that the world or your family or society may place upon you. Knowing the true essence of who you are gives you that power to step forward.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And I see you stepping into that power so beautifully, so gracefully. I'm really humbled and in awe to see how you're able to own your story and use it to help others. You mentioned something that I think is deeply important to the conversation of healing. So I wonder if we can go back to the work that you did around forgiveness of the men in this situation, and self-compassion of yourself for being in that situation.
Yeah. This has been one of the key steps in the very beginning for me to heal through this. And what it really is self-forgiveness of the judgment I placed on myself, self-forgiveness of the shame I placed on myself, and the misbelief that I had created. My power is dangerous because I had my power wrapped up in sex. And so
I like that.
Going into the forgiveness practices that were, I did these every single day. Offering real compassion and forgiveness for myself through that, I was able to look at these men as individuals that were probably lost themselves, like whatever. I was able to just more easily release it, because to continue carrying that, like that on, plus my own shame and stories and misbelief, like that's not where healing is. That's not the bridge to get me to this space.
Yeah, something that's been pivotal in my own healing, but certainly that I've seen a lot come up in my work, is the idea that if someone has been abusive to you, if someone has targeted you, if you've been the victim of someone else's choices and you hold on to the anger at them, what you're really allowing is for them to re-victimize you over and over again. And so the forgiveness piece, they never have to know. It is not about that person.
Nope.
The forgiveness, letting them off the hook, as it were, letting them out of the space in your brain, is the healing for you.
And in this instance, and anyone that's experienced this, hanging on to that, for me, what switched was allowing them to still have the power, like I was in that locked room.
Yeah.
And like, no more, there's just, the light has to shine. And through that is compassion, self-forgiveness, to then release myself, have my soul come back home, and to be able to share this story.
It's so beautiful. I think as you talk about the darkness finding light, like that was the light. The light was self-love and self-compassion and really coming home to who you are and where your worth resides. Beautiful. One final question for you. Summing all of this up together, I wonder, to a high school or college athlete who believes that that is who they are and that they have to put everything into that, or a sexual trauma victim who has somehow internalized that now that is part of their identity, that this is who they are, to somebody in a professional career, a doctor, a lawyer, someone in finance who believes that their worth and their identity is tied to that position and that reputation. I want to know, what would you say to someone to call them into awareness of their true self and their true worth?
Superpowers, baby. What are your superpowers? And by that, what are your values? Your values are your superpowers. And I didn't get clear on my values for quite some time. And once I did, for me, they are the core root to my being. And the order in which they come, they might switch a little, but that's how I show up. And that's where I get to ask the question, okay, if I'm going to make, maybe it's a deal in your job, like you're working out a contract, or it's a internship that you're thinking about going, or should I switch majors, or what college should I go to? When you are clear with your values of you as a person, the things that deeply, deeply are rooted inside of you, that's where your alignment is to move forward, with every single decision, every single communication that you have when you're communicating with people, So I would say, and that is something that it is the very first thing that I work with people on, is let's get really clear on your superpowers, because that's you. That's your root. That's your soul.
Jill Heiman, Awake Journey. Thank you for sharing so eloquently your path and your journey to becoming the visionary coach and leader that you are. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you for taking over. Thank you. We'll see you guys next time.